Okay, yes, carbon dividends are something that I think most people don't know about, and I want to make people aware. My number one intention in what we're about to present is to get the idea of what carbon dividends are in everybody's head. And so what I did was a few months ago, I found a video that belongs to a Canadian museum, and it had it's like 5 minute commercial in front of it about their donor program. And by the time you watched all this, you didn't even want to care about who was what their guest was. And, they basically, anyway, I cut that front part off, redid the video, put some, slides in it, and just explanatory. And then just for fun, I went to the website and I looked at their copyright requirements, and I was missing one thing. I was really, I didn't really care. I was going to do this anyway, but I went through their list, and all I had to do was put the web address to make this whole thing like approved by them. And so I ran back and I threw a slide in there with their web address on. So my video is kind of like official. So because I followed all their copyright requirements. But what we're going to watch, because it's about 20 minutes long, and a lot of it's kind of just, kind of in Climate Change 101. So we're going to skip that part. So I cut it down to two parts. And the first part is going to introduce the video. That part I haven't changed because I want to know people know what it is. And then we'll go right to the second part and play that. And then we'll see where we are. So go ahead and play that first slide, and then go on to the next one there. Let's go.
An event that took place at the museum.
If you look at per capita emissions, Australia has passed the United States, and Canada is growing. I mean, you're almost as bad as we are in the U.S. on a per capita emissions, and of course, the rest of the world. That's where the big increases are coming, because we used fossil fuels to raise our standard of living, and they want to do the same thing, and they have every right to do that. And if they don't have alternatives, they're going to do it the same way that we did, and that's burning fossil fuels, and that's what they're doing. In a paper we published last year, Young People's Burden, we show that unless we begin to reduce emissions very rapidly, we're handing young people a situation where they can only stabilize climate by sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. And we show that the cost of that, if we stay on business as usual, is going to be in the hundreds of trillions of dollars with any of the technologies that we know about. And that's just implausible. So we're in danger of handing them a situation where there's really no, doesn't appear to be any way out. And the tragedy of this situation is it's not necessary. If we would, so we looked in that paper, we show different scenarios for the future, continuing emissions increase. Oop, I didn't mean to do that. Can I go backward? Or what I meant to do was push this. So continuing business as usual, or flattening out emissions, or decreasing emissions 3% a year or 6% a year. If you would reduce emissions 3% a year, then the warming would peak at less than 1.5 degrees and then slowly decline, even without sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. So it's still physically possible to stop further warming, but it requires beginning to reduce emissions. And the problem is that fossil fuels are the cheapest energy. They appear to be cheapest because they don't include their cost to society. Just the cost of air pollution on human health, if you would only include that, you would make the competing cleaner energies much more competitive. And instead, we're even subsidizing the fossil fuels. So the solution that's required is make the price of fossil fuels honest by including their cost to society. And you could do that in a very simple way. Just collect the money from the small number of sources, the domestic mines and the ports of entry. So it costs almost nothing to collect it. And if you would give that money to the public, an equal amount to all legal residents of the country, then most people would come out ahead, about 70% with the present distribution of energy use. And we could move rapidly on that 3% per year reduction rate. In fact, the economic studies show that if you had a $10 a ton carbon fee rising $10 a ton each year, by the end of 10 years, the emissions would go down 30%, which is more rapid than 3% per year. But you have to actually do that. You can't do it with some gimmicky thing like cap and trade, which does almost nothing in practice. Globally, it doesn't do anything. Emissions just continue to go up. So this, by the way, is the only viable international solution. We've tried the cap and trade route, the Kyoto Protocol. It doesn't do anything. But if the United States or Europe or China would decide to have a across-the-board rising carbon fee, they can impose that practically globally by means of saying we're going to put border duties on products from countries that don't have an equivalent carbon fee. That's an enormous incentive for those other countries to have their own fee so they can collect the money themselves rather than have us collect money at the border. Economists say that would work, but politicians don't want to do it.
Okay, so that was the basic idea. And James goes on from there to, talk about, actually there's an organization, Americans for Carbon Dividends, and he talks about the website, and he asks if there's some people in the audience, and there were, so they talk. So let's move on to the next slide. And I'd suggest anybody interested in this, Google, after our show's over, of course, Americans for Carbon Dividends, and you can go to their website. And so check it out. One thing they have on the website is this video, which is very short and very good. It's just a commercial. So let's play that.
Want to get something done on climate change? Carbon Dividends is the bipartisan climate solution. Endorsed by business leaders, environmentalists, economists, and scientists, Carbon Dividends will cut emissions in half by 2035, protect family budgets, and create good-paying, clean energy and manufacturing jobs. It's time to end the gridlock in Washington and start solving problems together. Carbon Dividends is the bipartisan climate solution. The time is right now.
Okay, so, to keep things, we have this one. Yes, I do want to talk about this. So this is the idea. Everybody in the country would get one of these, and Marcus, you would have a different flag on yours, but if you came and visit, it'd be okay. Well, you'd be getting the money to be able to buy it, so it'd work. But what I want to do is let's click and go to this link, and it's a link that I have a public file on my website, and it's a PDF document I want everybody to see. And Here it is. Yeah. So, um, yeah, so this is a very nice white paper that explains everything that James basically said in the video, and I just want to make people aware of this. And so, if this is another thing to Google, after the show, come back to this slide, and if you were to Google that title, you'd probably find it somewhere. I should probably put a link. Well, there is the link. If you look at it, you can. I don't know. Anyway, so let's Amos, why don't you take over? You are continuing this. I looked things over, so it very much dovetails with what I'm doing very nicely. So let's just keep moving.
All right. So basically, let me explain a little bit more about the dividends, because we said we debate it, but it's important to understand what the proposal is and how it differs from others. So we discussed carbon tax previously in the last week, and basically there is a consensus among scientists, among economists at this point that we need carbon tax to address global climate crisis and the effects of carbon. And the reason is that when you're paying for gas, for your heat, or for anything, you're not paying for externalities. Their externalities are things that are costing someone, but they're not costing the oil manufacturers or the power energy manufacturers. They're hidden. So if people get sick from the soot, or there's climate change as a result, and we lose money on that, that is not built into the price. So the economists came and said, well, why don't we put that into the price? Once we actually make the price of the product more representative of the true cost, then the price is going to go up, and it will affect how people behave. It's going to reduce the use of energy and fossil fuels, and reduce emissions, therefore. So basically they came up with that was the tax plan, the carbon fees. They figured out they could do $50 easily per ton, which would make a huge difference and start reducing things significantly. And then some people took it further. They said, well, we don't have the buy-in of Republicans, and in the U.S. the biggest debate is happening in the U.S., and the U.S. is the most influential country. If the U.S. goes in one direction, it probably will affect other countries down the line. So let's address it. So what they came up with was the idea of not that they wouldn't tax the carbon. They still tax the carbon, except they're saying we're going to do dividends. We're going to give every citizen in the country a certain flat amount that's taken from these companies that are producing energy, and give it back to people. And that should have wide bipartisan support, and so forth. And so there is also the idea of gradually raising it. So you start with a carbon tax at a certain level, and then you slowly build it up every year. The second point is that the carbon dividend is paid to Americans, and is funded by 100% of the revenue. So everything that's being taken as a tax or fee goes back to the individuals. The point 3 is an interesting one, and that is that there's going to be a significant regulatory rollback. So in order to sweeten it, because they had a position at that point saying, well, it's going to hurt poor Americans more than anyone else. Why? Because poor Americans spend a bigger percentage of their money, of their income, on energy. So it's going to have a bigger effect the obviously, if you raise the taxes, it's not just going to be the companies that are shouldering it. They're going to pass all of that costs to the consumer. So if you raise the tax, you pull a fee from energy manufacturing company, energy generating company. That fee is then going to be passed down to the consumer, and of course that's the case. However, here they came and said, well, we're going to give the dividends. Okay, you're going to give the dividends, and some of the point is that you're giving a flat return, so the people in the bottom of the economic layer that are normally not going to be using that as much energy as people at the high end of the economic scale are going to pay less for energy, and therefore the dividend is going to cover them and some. So they're going to make more money than they're spending on energy. It changes when you're going to the higher income brackets. But that is the argument. But still, they couldn't get everybody on. So they incorporated the idea that they would compensate for that by rolling back regulation. So, and that got a lot of industry on board. And in a moment, I will show you who's supporting all of this. The fourth point is that this is a step that they boast can be done unilaterally. It doesn't need an international agreement. The U.S. can do it right now, and once the U.S. does it, it will create a domino effect. That's the claim, because a country that has doesn't have mitigation for carbon emissions will have to pay a border adjustment fee, sell something to the U.S., for example, where there is such a regulation, such an arrangement. And so they will have to pay the difference, so that there is no advantage given to buying energy products from other countries where the generation is dirtier, where the saving on these clean aspect. So that border adjustment, because it's being implemented to other countries, say Japan wants to sell a certain amount of energy, they have to pay $100 per ton that this of pollution that this will generate. And so rather than that, they will come to the conclusion it is more advantageous for them to do the same and collect the taxes and share it to their citizens as dividends, rather than paying it to the U.S. as a adjustment tax. The problem with that is that there is no saying that they won't go the route that other things that are being taxed with tariffs are going through. So basically, they may choose to battle it with a trade war rather than go the other way and incorporate it into their own model. And that is something that's not addressed.
A quick question, meanwhile. Can you please tell us who is supporting, what companies are supporting this, the Baker-Schultz plan?
So, as I said, this is the Baker-Schultz plan. So that's basically Baker and Schultz are conservatives. Here's Schultz.
No. What companies?
What companies?
You said companies would support this. I would like to know what companies.
Okay, well, here you will be surprised. The companies that are
okay. Thank you. Okay. Go on, please.
So that is my point. What I think is attracting those companies is the fact that they're willing to roll back legislation or regulation of these industries, which in some, I assume that their conclusion is that's where most of their cost is, and if they could skirt those issues, they could
One
probably.
idea about rolling back the regulations is to generate greater innovation. So essentially, you're replacing the regulations by the financial incentive, because this whole thing is working because everybody wants to save money.
Right. No,
See,
that's an argument that comes down the line, and I'll address that. But basically, what I think is it's kind of the detail is in the devil is in the detail, and we're willing to waive regulations. They're saying as a defense to this proposal that it's only addressing regulations relating to carbon emissions, but there are things that could be related that I don't know if it's going to cover or not. For example, exploitation of workers, natives in drilling, the pollutions of leakage or pipelines breaking, the things like
that's
that.
a different kind of regulation. I would confuse human rights with how they're drilling.
But that's a good question, whether this would protect them, whether they could incorporate it in such a way that it would protect them or not. And you do have to be a little cautious when you see people that are very conservative, like Baker and Schultz. Here's what Schultz said about it: a carbon dividend policy could spur large education in the greenhouse gas emission reductions in the greenhouse gas emission than all of President Obama's climate policies. At the same time, our plan would strengthen the economy, help working class Americans, and promote national security, all while reducing regulation and shrinking the size of government. Talking about it having a greater effect. Here's their projection. Obama's is the green line. Trump's was the minus 14%, which got worse. And then you have the projection if they had the Baker-Schultz plan, which meet Paris and some. So that's their argumentation. And they have even Paulson say this is a fundamentally conservative plan, one that showcases the principles of free markets and limited government. I'm a proud Republican and believe it is important to protect those principles and always strive for evidence-based policymaking. This plan provides the roadmap to do just that. So yeah, it's I mean, I'm not necessarily against it because there are conservatives for it. That would be insanity. What I'm saying is we have to move with caution and really understand what the implications of everything is. Now, to your point as to the innovation, yeah, if you were talking, and this goes back to counter for argumentation against carbon tax, because the critics say, well, it's dividends, schmividends. What you're doing is you're raising taxes that's going to come to you. It's going to affect the citizen, and then you're going to give them the money back, but they're still paying more for the energy. So you haven't done much. It's like a sleight of hand.
Well, I think we've done I think that the change is enormous. I don't agree that we've done nothing at all. I have a jaded view about why conservatives are for this. Can we hear me?
Yeah, but let me just finish that argument that that's the argument against it is the criticism. But what I'd like to correct on this is that, yeah, maybe that would have been the case if we didn't have alternatives. So basically, you can buy the energy or not, and you kind of need to get the energy, so you're going to pay whatever it takes. That's not the case, though, because people are going to have alternatives in the form of green energy. Once the green energy alternatives break even at some point and you can save money, they're actually going to make more money on the dividends that are taken on carbon tax than they would pay to the energy generation. So that argument is kind of flawed. But go ahead.
Okay. My jaded view about why conservatives are for this is because we can do this and they can stay conservative. You see, you don't have to become progressive. You don't have to change your values to participate. You get your credit card, and then if the carbon's really expensive, then what you do is you don't buy any more than you have to. And if there is a green alternative, you take that. If there isn't, you minimize your impact. You consume the smallest amount of carbon that you can, because you want to save the rest of that money, because that's, and essentially, when you really think about it, this is the only thing that can work. If we have a carbon tax, without this, the economy gets depressed. You can't raise the price on carbon without compensating people in some way, because you're not paying them anymore. So what you going to do? You've got to give the money back to them. And, the details, there may be some minor details to work out, but fundamentally, this is what you got to do. But it is such a huge change that people can't wrap their heads around it. I confess, when I first came across this idea, free money? You're giving people free money? Then you think about it. No, you're not. Actually, you're giving them their birthright, kind of, because you are polluting their environment. So, and nobody's going to get rich off this, obviously, Well,
no, the
maybe.
surplus is negative. The surplus is negative.
I think it's a great idea.
That's the important thing to understand, in that the surplus is, at least initially, negative. So you're not really benefiting people. Perhaps maybe the people at the bottom of the economic scale, because their use of energy is lower, but it will cost more. However, that's a way, like the dividends is not a way to change the scale of where the money goes, but rather to make the policies of taxing carbon more palatable to the public.
Well, one issue is, how are you going to set the tax? And one proposal is by, citizens committees. I think that's James's plan.
Guys, there's one thing, the ideas sounds interesting, but what really makes me suspicious is, about the corporate founding members and the individual founding members. Those companies and people are not suspicious, to necessarily act in favor of green policies or green energy. I'm scratching my head and I'm trying to where is the loophole for them?
Marcus, you can relax.
Yeah, I can. Okay.
Yeah, because the James Hansen white paper I presented, that was given to Congress, and some action was taken on it in like 2017, and a bunch of activity, and then nothing. It was sent to a committee where it has been living in obscurity ever since. So, the idea that, corporations are really on board with this, don't go there. You've got some people who are agreeing with the James Baker plan, but in general, industry does not want this, because who makes out? The people.
Okay. I got you. This would mean, if the industry doesn't like this plan, but there must be some tool of threat that they would, which would oppose on them if they would not agree to this. I can guess, right?
Well, they see where the winds are blowing. Something will have to be done about carbon. They know that. The cap and trade has failed. The Kyoto has failed. Paris is not doing enough. And they know that people are eventually, it's going to blow over. So they have to minimize the damage, and at the same time maybe score some points on something else. And that is I think what is going on here. The lack of regulations would benefit them in some ways that are perhaps more costly to them if they have to do investigation on exhaustive investigation for drilling or whatever, and now they would have a green light to do much more drilling if they like, as long as they pay the tax. Maybe it's worth it to them. I don't know what their calculation is. We don't have those brains, economic brains, that are working on their behalf, but they're of course not doing something that is opposing to their interests. Here's a clip from Andrew Young, just exactly about this congressional attempt to do and clarifying his positions, and in a way that kind of like he unified that with his universal minimum income idea. Those dividends would serve both ends. So here.
What would Andrew Yang as president facilitate in terms of combating climate change?
How many of you all studied economics? I bet it's a popular major here. So if you study economics, you know that one of the biggest problems is economic externalities, where someone's not paying the cost. And the biggest externality facing us right now is carbon emissions. If I'm a company and I pollute, that doesn't cost me, that costs everyone. So one of the big moves we have to make, in my view, is to actually price in that externality. I'm for a carbon fee, a carbon tax and dividend, and then use that money to start moving us towards renewable and sustainable sources of energy. If you have a price on carbon and then you ratchet up that price progressively, then you'll see a lot of these companies invest meaningfully in reducing their emissions in a way that they don't right now because the money's not in it.
So I'll just stop you for a second, because you obviously have thought about economic issues a lot and in great detail, and you've written a lot about them. For people who are watching this who haven't thought that through or don't know how that works, how does that happen? Does that mean everybody gets to emit a certain amount of carbon, and beyond that you have to buy credits, or you just pay for the amount of carbon that you're emitting all the time, which forces you to actually reduce it?
So we would have pricing, the carbon fee initially would be $40 a ton. So it's immediate, and if you're emitting anywhere from a ton up, then you start paying into the system. But then you have an economic incentive immediately to try and reduce those emissions, try and streamline your operations so that they're cleaner, more sustainable.
And you would do this, you become president, and maybe you don't have a compliant Congress. How do you get this done?
Well, I'm happy to say that a carbon fee and dividend is a bipartisan idea. There are many Republicans that are behind it. It came this close to passing, even in this Congress, which is really saying something. With this president, it came this close. So as president, I believe that we can get that through, because this is something that even industry leaders have been calling for at this point.
So yeah, even Milton Friedman is on board with that and has promoted it. So there it is. I mean, you can decide on your own, but I think I'm not.
But find out about it.
What's that?
Find out about it. Everybody should find out about this.
Everybody should understand how this is structured. Here's another video that may help clarify some. It's a short.
Yeah, this is a really good one.
Yep.
If we needed a reminder of climate change, the scorching summer Europe just had in July was just the sort of extreme weather scientists say is becoming more frequent. To bring carbon emissions under control, more and more leaders now agree with one thing.
We must go further. We must strive for more. A two-step approach is needed to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030 by 50, if not 55%.
The simplest way to do this is through a tax on carbon. If carbon-intensive activities and products become more expensive, we'll consume less of them, and emissions will be lower than otherwise. But there is one big problem. Higher carbon prices can cause a big hit to the living standards of those already worse off. That's because poorer people often spend a larger share of their incomes than the rich do on carbon-intensive things, such as petrol or heating fuel. When the French government tried to increase France's carbon tax on transport fuel and heating oil, the reaction from what became the Yellow Vest movement was explosive. So here's the dilemma. We have to cut carbon emissions, but the way to do so hurts the poorest. It seems we have to choose between climate catastrophe and social disaster. What we need is a just transition to the low-carbon economy. Some French economists think they know how.
What we had in mind was just to show that it is possible to design a system that makes almost everybody in the poorest half of the population as well off or better off with the tax than without. That was the point.
This is how it would work. When a driver fills up her car with petrol or diesel, the price she pays is made up of two parts. There is the cost of supplying the fuel itself, then on top of that is tax linked to the CO2 emitted while driving. It is this tax that most economists think should go up to encourage people to reduce their use of fossil fuels, which contribute to climate change. While people in cities have the option of public transport if a carbon tax drives up prices at the pump, people in rural areas often have no alternative to taking the car, and often don't have the means to change their car for a more fuel-efficient one. But what if the tax, instead of disappearing into the government budget, was immediately returned to people in cash?
Such a carbon tax to be completely, to be well perceived by people and also to be just, it should be designed such that the revenues of the tax do not go into the budget, public budget, general budget, but they are kept to be redistributed to people to alleviate the regressive effects.
Let's look at how this would work for a typical low-income family in France. Marion lives in a rural area with her husband and 2 children. They're not so well off. Their income is only in the second tenth of all households. They use oil heating and have a diesel car. In the scheme proposed by the French economists, Marion's family would be paying 72 euros a month more in carbon taxes than a typical family in a mid-sized town, which has electric heating and no car. That would be a big hit to their living standards, if it was the whole policy. But because Marion and her husband have low incomes, they would also receive a carbon check worth 125 euros a month. Put together, this policy would leave the family with 630 euros more every year to spend.
The problem is that the Ministry of Finance needs money, and so their incentive to put the tax and keep the money is very, very strong. And so it's more there that there is a difficulty, I think, to make people understand that this is not a financing tax, it is just an incentive to reduce emissions, so they don't have to keep the money.
The hope is that once vulnerable households see that the policy makes them financially better off, their opposition to higher carbon taxes will wane away. With the climate emergency, there's no way around making carbon more expensive. But it's only if higher carbon taxes are also fair that they will be politically viable.
I think that was very succinct and well done. But yeah, so basically, and so now the questions that we will have to think is just don't buy it all like hook and sinker or whatever it's called. Sink and hooker? No.
What? What do you mean?
Don't just buy everything in one like as it's presented. Think about the aspects.
Yes.
Do we do the dividends as a flat amount for every citizen, in which case it was going to be very minimal impact or negligible for the higher.
I got it.
Or you only give it to the bottom half, but then you may lose support of some people that are in the middle, or do you do a combination? Do you give dividends, partly dividends, and then partly invest in governmental?
Well, you know where I am on
development.
100% dividend.
So
100%.
You don't think that we could benefit from having something like the NIH of energy, where the government would develop and research energy and then make that available to the industry? I mean that's
a separate issue. That's a separate issue.
I mean it's not. You have a certain pot of money.
I'll explain why.
Yeah.
See, by carbon dividends, what you're doing is you are putting I don't even like to call it a tax. I just prefer, but we have to use the word tax to explain where they do collect the money. Okay. If you are going to implement a carbon tax, you are going to ruin the economy that you are implementing, that you are putting that tax on, because the whole world doesn't have that tax. You are disadvantaging, you're putting your people at a disadvantage by taking all that money and turning it back over to them. You're making the damage to the economy the absolute minimum. If you if you only kick back 80%, oh, you've opened the door to all sorts of corruption, lack of transparency, and you're defeating the entire purpose, which is to preserve the economy. And that's really why conservatives are for it, because you don't have to be, it doesn't matter what side or what you believe, everybody believes in saving money. And saving money will change your behavior, unless you're crazy.
I got two questions to you guys. First of all, from what I saw in the clip, they say that the money goes directly back to the individual person, right?
Yes.
So this means in the budget, there's a certain amount is missing, right?
It's
in the end. No, hold on. Follow my thought. This means you have less available in the budget because you got to pay every individual, a certain amount. Okay.
No, it's the same amount.
So, hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. And the plan is, to help mostly the poorer families and the poorer individual. So you got a less big budget, So you gotta save somewhere, right? Money is not growing on trees, so you gotta find ways to save money, to get everything fulfilled what you want to do, with the money you calculated, which is now less than before. So what do you think? Who would be punished by this? I would like to say punished, or who's suffering from this? Who would be taxed? Who would has to pay more instead? No,
Marcus, the carbon tax is an added tax, so it's not already in the budget. It's not part of the existing tax structure.
Okay.
So it's basically whatever they raise with that tax is separate from taxation and goes directly back as dividends. So there's no
impact. It would be a tax put on the prices on the oil prices. Sorry, right?
Right.
At the point of origin. They tax carbon at the point of origin.
I see.
Origin of the generation of the pollution, not of the. It's the highest. You put it on the highest level, so you don't tax
you actually,
drilling.
Tax the source. Yes, it's the easiest place to get it, and then everything else rolls downhill. Then you're letting conventional economy. The price of everything is going to go up.
Well,
but then,
the way the proposal
because you're
works
getting the
now,
tax, it's offset.
The way just to clarify, the way the proposal works now, though, is they're putting the tax on the pollution generating aspect. So it's the highest level. It's the generation of the electricity or of the energy, rather than the extraction of the salt.
No, you do it at the extraction.
That's not what they're proposing, but
the dividend plan is very clear on that. And this is like our first segment. About the ideas being watered down, being taken into the mainstream liberal. Whatever you want to call it, away from the more radical, like do it this way because it makes sense.
I don't want to say that the idea is bad. I think the idea is good, because but I still, I look at the names of the companies who are in this, and if you tell me now that the tax is put on the already existing oil price, I see for the moment nothing changes much for those companies, because they would get the same profit, at least when it starts. And this is why I'm asking, where are the loopholes? Because none of them, I guarantee you, none of them wants to pay pay more money than they ultimately have to. We saw this. How many times did we see this? And look, Michael Bloomberg is on it also, and Stephen Hawking. I know if they're referring to this Stephen Hawking. I'm skeptic, because it sounds too good to be true. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think that the candy is the regulation rollback. I really think that's where what they have to gain from it. That's the compromise.
All right, but we would stick to the topic, Keith and Amos, because as I said, the idea is good, But the question is, in how far will they try to get out of it, and find loopholes to get away with the business as usual?
Well, for one, that's exactly
the
why
French
we
clip,
have to.
The French clip made the point that of course the politicians are going to try to steal the money, and that's why I'm kind of adamant about the 100%, 100%, 100%. Repeat it until you get sick of me saying it, because if you let that's how it works. That's how we lose. That's why we have done nothing about the environment over all these years, because
exactly
victory here and it's taken away.
So,
and if
would you say that the NIH model has failed?
Where are we? We're in a mess. Everything has failed. I mean, that's essentially the proof of why we have to do something else.
And I think in the end, sorry, I interrupted you. Go on, please.
No, I'm just the NIH has afforded us the ability to generate the COVID drugs much faster than we would have otherwise. It would have taken years, and they've shortened it to a year, just based on the fact that we have this governmental institution that's doing research for the pure purpose of research and offering it up. So. I don't think that it is a bad model. I think it has to be weighed, and I see your points as well as to why you say it should be 100% dividends, but I'm not yet convinced.
All right. Interesting, it's an interesting model, but we all have our hesitations, from different perspectives. And I think we should. Do we have more maybe for next week, Keith? Do we have more?
And if we're going to cut it here, I do want to say what I was going to cover, because the next segment is somewhat timely. So let's at least start it. Mission accomplished, though. Amos and I have established that what dividends are. And
yes, exactly.
Find out what they are and get it, because it is a hard idea to accept. Like I say, well, first I heard of it, I said, what? No. Then you think about it. Wait a minute. This is magic. Yeah. This is magic. Yeah. Do it.
I can only tell what Keith just said, to our audience, go and do research for yourself. I hope we will definitely, Amos, Keith, you will definitely stay on topic what this concerns, to maybe get more background information. I'm very curious, my point is, if I look at the company's names, and I think it is too good to be true. There must be something behind it which helps them, and maybe it really was that they had to look into the gun, where it was said, you can either accept this or that, and then they finally said, okay, then we go with that one. But I don't know, and it would be great to learn more about it from you guys.
And there are organizations that are still generating content that is anti this scheme, and one wonders who is funding those. So that's another thing to further investigate. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same companies that put their names on it that are also playing on the other side and criticizing the whole scheme, and trying to contradict the idea of taxes altogether. But remains to be seen.
Yeah.